All right, it's that time again. Another Carolina podcast. Early morning edition, so forgive us if our energy levels are a little bit low. Chris is over here pounding some coffee. Wes is good to go. I'm sure he's already been to the gym this morning. Confirm or deny?
Deny.
Okay, that's all right. Well, I know you're ready to go.
I'm an afternoon guy.
Oh, you're an afternoon guy?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, either way, you got your Dunder Mifflin shirt on, which means you are ready to go.
I wore this just for you.
I know you did, because I made fun of you for not wearing it
podcasting
last
shirt.
week.
Yeah.
It really is. The amount of podcasts that you've recorded wearing that shirt is, I think, disproportionate to the amount of time that Chris or I have worn any one shirt while podcasting.
I will own that.
But either way, we got a bunch to catch up on, and we're now in a dead period, which is great news for the two of you, especially. You get a little bit of a time until, July 24th, you said? I think, and until Carolina can do anything else interesting that would require us to do any emergency podcast. But we do have 3 commits to cover today, as well as the very last week of camp this past weekend, right before the dead period, including a couple of official visitors that were here in Columbia. But we're going to go ahead and get started with a couple commits that have I guess, announced their decisions since we did our last podcast last Monday. We'll go ahead and get started with a 3-star offensive tackle, 6'4", 285, out of Woodbridge, Virginia, Vershawn Lee. He committed, I think, the afternoon after we posted this podcast, so sorry that it's been a while before we've been able to update you guys on it. But, Wes, can you give us an update on Lee's recruitment process and his commitment?
Yeah, I think another versatile kid. I think, we list him as a tackle, but could play there, could play guard, could even probably profile as a center. I think you look at what Eric Wolfer's looked for, it's been, versatility and athleticism. This kid has it. I think they kind of came across him when they were recruiting Ja'Kai Moore. He's obviously also from Virginia, and they've been up there, and they've kind of cast a wide net on O-line recruiting, so offered him. He was in Columbia earlier this year, I think maybe January, February time period. Had a visit then, really, really liked it. Came back for his official visit earlier this month and had a great time. Actually, I think really decided at that point that he was going to be a Gamecock. Took one more official visit to Pitt. I think one of those situations where he had told him he would come see their school and take the official, so he followed through with that. And then, immediately announced a couple of days after that for South Carolina. So, I think you got to give an assist to Ja'Kai Moore. He was his host on the visit. Vershawn just raved about the way Ja'Kai sort of told him everything about the program, told him, all the good things, but also told him, hey, these workouts have been killer. They've crushed us. But if you're going to be successful, you got to work hard. So I think that helped out. I think the relationship with Eric Wolfer was big here. And Vershawn's mom just absolutely loved everything on the official visit. Anytime you got mom on board, that's a big step. So another good pickup. And actually, Chris, I think this probably, for the most part, closes out their O-line recruiting for this class. They got 5 guys. Obviously, Isaiah Walker, they'll look to keep him on board. He looks fairly strong right now, but something we'll continue to monitor. But assuming those 5 guys stick, it looks like those will be their 5 guys for this class.
Yeah, and it's another good group, with some versatility. You mentioned Walker. I think he's sort of the crown jewel of that offensive line class. We had a chance to watch him in camp, the final camp day on Saturday. He participated. And that's the thing you like about Walker. He's certainly maybe a little bit more unique among offensive linemen, that he's definitely enjoyed the recruiting process and gone through that continually. For now, not going to take any more visits. Again, like Wes said, something we'll monitor. But I can see I've seen him on film, but seeing him in person and seeing how he's filled out and how he moves, you can see why the hype is there. For me, I think he should be a little bit higher in the rankings. He's moved up continually on the Rivals Network, but when he committed to South Carolina, he was 260 pounds or so at most, and now he's in the 300 range. Still moves extremely well. He's got the feet to play left tackle. So I really liked what I saw from him. And then you add Lee and the other guys in the class, Tyshawn Wanamaker out of the state. I think it's another good group with some versatility. And you always want to bring in numbers in your class, and every year they've seemed to want to take 4 to 5 guys, and if you can hit on a few of those, then you're doing pretty well for yourself.
It seems like, obviously, I think we're all kind of at the point where it's just trust Wolf in terms of what he's looking for, in terms of the way that he evaluates talent on the front end and the way that he develops it. We've got no reason except for to trust whatever his process is, but he seems to be, obviously Carolina's not going to land a bunch of 5-star offensive linemen necessarily right now, but when you look at the guys that he's offered and that he's excited about coming in, it's also guys that don't have necessarily like the biggest offer list. Like Lee was offered by seemingly every ACC school. He's got Boston College, Louisville, North Carolina State, Pittsburgh, Syracuse, Virginia Tech, Wake Forest, and then the only other SEC offer he had was Tennessee. And I imagine part of that is him being a little bit undersized during the majority of this process. If he's just now about 300, like you said, he was 260 when Carolina offered him. Right now, like I said, on Rivals, he's 285. So he seems like a guy that, in theory, his body will at least be a year away from playing. But Wolf, as you guys mentioned right off the top, is looking for someone like Lee who's maybe a little bit more explosive, a little bit quicker, a little more athletic. Has he found something? Is he tapping into some sort of market inefficiency here that you think other programs around the country will start to pursue in terms of offensive linemen that are maybe a little bit undersized, but what they lack in that bulk or maybe making up for in speed and athleticism?
I mean, O-line's already hard. It's the hardest position, don't you agree, Wes, to project? Probably. I mean, quarterback's tough too. Probably quarterback and offensive line are really, really difficult. And I think you just look at a lot of people think, okay, you need to sign 4 stars or 5 stars who are 6'5" and 330 pounds. And if you get a bunch of those guys, you're probably going to be pretty good. I mean, Georgia's done a lot of that lately, but they've also had, David Andrews, who plays for the Patriots, went to Georgia. He was an undersized guy out of high school who I think was maybe at best a mid 3-star or so. And, he's still playing for the Patriots and was really good in college too. So I think you just look at, Wolford's not afraid to take a guy who's maybe a little more undersized. I mean, Ronald Patrick was one of them. He was probably 6'1". That sort of diminished his market and his stock on the recruiting trail, but he had long arms, big long arms, and he could play football. And so he offered him. He was a good player at South Carolina. He played in the league, and he wasn't a first-round pick or anything, but he played in the league. Then on the other side, Wolford took a guy like, Corey Robinson, who was the opposite end of that spectrum. He was a giant, and there's a little bit of that in this class. You got, Jason Turnitine, who's 6'7", 340, the human eclipse. And then you got Trey Jones, who is, 6'2", and, undersized right now, but also is like a 4'7", 40 guy. And he has
30-plus inch vertical.
Right, and he's a wingspan of more of like a 6'4" guy or something. So those are the things you look for. And so when you're evaluating offensive line, that's what if you got a huge guy, that's great, but can he move? Can he move? Can he bend? Is he mentally smart enough? Does he like to work? You have to sort of assess all those things, and that's why camp's important. That's why getting to know the prospect's important, and not just going up and down a list saying this guy's huge.
Well, I think you look at not to hate on Rivals, but I've also looked at some of the rankings of some of the O linemen Wolf has signed, and I think you can already look at like a Jalen Nichols, and the current players work these camps a lot of times. So just looking at Jalen Nichols standing there compared to 99% of the campers at O line, yeah. It's insane. Just the difference in size and perceived athleticism there is crazy. But you look at Nichols, and what you hear from out of South Carolina's camp and stuff about him, I feel like Rivals may have. I think you can already say Rivals may have missed on that one. and I just look at Ja'Kai Moore and just the athleticism size combination there. And I wonder how he wasn't at least, a higher 3-star, like a 5'7" 3-star. You're talking about, and I like to look at what other schools, not just, what other schools have offered, which is something a lot of fans look at, is just the offer list, which these days the schools send out so many offers. Some schools do that doesn't always mean anything. But if a guy's a top target for a school, Ja'Kai Moore, according to a lot of the Penn State sites, was Penn State's like #1 offensive line target. So you're talking about a guy that Penn State clearly had very, very high, wanted him. for one, it's a heck of a recruiting job just to be able to go and take him from them. But two, I think that says something about him as a player. So not all these guys are 4-star guys, but I think some of them, just like it's hard for the coaches to evaluate O-line, it's harder for the industry to evaluate offensive linemen. So I think you got some guys that already, there are some signs may have been underrated, and then you add those type of guys with the Isaiah Walkers, the Dylan Wanhams of the world who are highly rated, and I think that's a nice recipe for success for South Carolina. And I like the thing I like about Walker. Yes, he does enjoy the recruiting process. He's even commented on a couple of our live streams of the podcast that he was watching. Actually listening about
back
recruiting
when we used
and stuff.
to do that.
Yeah, back when we used to do that. But I like the fact he did come to camp and compete. I mean,
oh yeah, definitely.
A 4-star guy. Final day of camp, he doesn't have to get out there and work. Nobody's forcing him to, but he just went out there and went after it. I respect that. Yeah,
a couple other points on the offensive line is, I think when you've got a coach who's, people, there's sort of, we always have the segments of the fan base, and so, there's ones that trust the coaches, and then there's the side that gets mad at trust the coaches because they heard that a lot towards the end of the Spurrier era or whenever, and that didn't go so well. But when you've got a guy like Wolford who, he has a track record, and when you got a guy like that, he was one of the first to offer Isaiah Walker. I think when Isaiah Walker committed, I don't remember the exact order, but when Isaiah committed a long time ago, he had Kentucky and South Florida. Now he has Florida, FSU, Miami, LSU, Ohio State, et cetera, et cetera. And so they got him committed early, and now he's sort of blossomed into this. Wolford offered Seth McLaughlin first out of Beaufort in Georgia. He's committed to Alabama now. He got offers from everybody. South Carolina also was the first big school to offer Trey Jones from Abbeville. Now, a bunch of schools haven't followed. First of all, he committed on the spot. And second of all, some schools are going to look and say, that kid's 6'2", we're not going to take him. So I think a lot of it is about trusting your eyes, as a coach. So if you see a guy and you think he can play, then you take him, and sometimes you sort of throw that other stuff out the window. Now, if you took all – I think people get upset about, well, this guy doesn't have a huge offer list. If you took 4 to 5 guys in every class who had meager offer list, I think your chances of being good on the O-line or at any position are not as good. That's just the way it is. But you can work some of those guys in. You look at, there's plenty of guys in the NFL. Jason Kelsey from the Eagles was a walk-on linebacker, I think, at Cincinnati. Lane Johnson for the Eagles. You can go back and look at Lane Johnson's rivals profile. He's a 6'3", 202-pound quarterback out of high school. Went to Oklahoma, was, I think, maybe a tight end, defensive end. He changed positions, then he eventually got up to 300 pounds, was, I think, number 7 pick overall in the draft. So you can get those guys, and you're also going to see some guys in the league who were 4 or 5-star players. Isaiah Wynn was a big-time player. Trenton Brown just got the biggest, richest contract in NFL history for an offensive lineman. He was a 3-star junior college recruit who played for Muschamp at Florida. So there's a mix of those guys, and I think look, the biggest thing they look for is, can a guy move? Can he bend? Can he play? Does he have the mentality to do it?
Somebody else that may end up having been underrated through the recruiting process, he's a high 3-star guy, but still a 3-star guy. He does have an impressive offer list from Alabama, from Auburn, Florida, Georgia, Missouri, Nebraska, who recently committed to South Carolina as another defensive back. He's officially listed as an athlete, but being recruited as a defensive back out of Orlando, Florida, a guy that we've talked about several times on this show already, Dominic Hill. Walk me through his recruitment and then his commitment on, that was last week, 6 days ago, the 20th.
Yeah, Dom was a guy that has played defensive back for 1 year, and so once he made that switch last season, his offer list, his stock sort of really exploded. So South Carolina got in there early. Coleman Hutzler, Travaris Robinson got him on campus, I think 3 to 4 times for overnights this year. So he took, I think, a visit in March, a visit in April, and then he took his official visit in June. So even that first visit in March that was an overnight unofficial, we started hearing good things about South Carolina's chances, and the relationship just sort of grew there. And we got to watch him in camp actually on Saturday, right, Wes, as well. And, didn't get to see him run the 40. Wish we would have got to see that. But he was a guy that, man, you look at him and he's filled out a little bit. Like you look at his rival's profile and then you look at him now, he's clearly put on some weight and filled out some. He's got length, 6'1", maybe almost 6'2", with long arms, moves well. He's a guy that's willing to be physical, and I think he held up well in coverage. You could tell Travaris Robinson kept pulling him aside and showing him some things, even in the midst of like warm-ups, just some different things about jamming and how to move your feet. So that's, I guess you could say, the exciting thing about him is there's still a lot of untapped potential. He doesn't completely know what's going on at defensive back right now, but he's got a lot of the tools that you look for.
I mean, is the transition maybe part of the – because clearly, like I said, he's got a good offer list. He's still listed as a 3-star, as I mentioned, sort of towards the high end of 3-star. How much of that is because he's an athlete and people don't really know what position he's going to be playing, and then that is maybe adversely affecting his rival's rank?
I mean, I think it's partially just because he's so raw at that position. You don't really know for sure what he's going to turn into. I think, though, you look at defensive back for this class, and it's not really a great year just nationally at that position. So I think, if you have to, you can take some guys like him who maybe are more developmental types. He's only played it a year, but that just means there's plenty that you're talking about a blank canvas basically that T-Rob can work with, Will Muschamp can work with, and I think you look at the Fortune kid at Sumter, similar deal, high upside, a little bit of a raw player. They're in on some other guys that maybe don't quite fit that, but I think at that position, if you have a guy that can match up athletically with with wide receivers in the league, then you take a chance on him. And I think obviously a lot of teams had that same thought with Dom Hill if you look at that offer list.
Last guy up that is committed in the last week. This one really came out of left field. Obviously, I'm not on the ground covering this like you guys. But South Carolina got a commitment from recent William and Mary tight end Nick Muse, whose brother Tanner y'all will probably know as the Clemson defensive back. Where did this come from, and how should Gamecock fans feel about Nick Muse coming to Carolina?
I mean, I think they should feel really good. I mean, the kid's a player. I've seen a little bit of video on him. Chris saw him in person quite a bit at camp. But yeah, they really needed a guy to sort of bridge the gap at tight end. I think you look at a couple of upperclassmen, Kyle Markway, Keel Pollard, and then you look at the two incoming true freshmen that are already on campus. They're high on those guys, but you look everywhere in between. You're very unproven at tight end, and South Carolina's been talented at tight end for a long time. But you're starting to see some of those guys move on. Obviously, Hayden Hurst has been gone a couple of years now. Casey Crosby, Jacob August have moved on. You've lost some starting pieces there. I think everybody feels pretty good about Keel Pollard and Kyle Markway manning that spot, but you kind of needed to bridge the gap and balance out the classes at tight end. They were looking for somebody who could come in and play, and he was in the transfer portal. He worked out for the staff, and looked really, really good. Big kid, played like I think 4 sports in high school. I really like the pickup, and I think the interesting thing will be, does he get the NCAA waiver to be able to play this year? But if he doesn't, he'll take a red shirt this year, and then Keel Pollard's gone after this season. So
and Muse will have 2 years to play here at Carolina.
Yeah, he'll have 2 years either way. So he'll either have 2 years starting this year, or he'll have to sit out this year and have 2 years starting next season. In 2020. But I like it. They'll still take another tight end, a high school guy. So I think, everybody was just sort of taken a bit off guard by it, but I wouldn't let the fact that he was at William and Mary, guide my thought process on him. Because you watch, there's not much film out there on him. I don't think that was a very good William and Mary team.
Yeah, I don't think William and Mary's on TV a whole lot.
Yeah, but if the clips that are out there, and then Chris came up to me before we had any idea that it was him, and was like, "Who is this guy? We have to figure out who this guy is." So he had caught his attention, before we even realized that this was a guy South Carolina might end up taking.
Yeah, there was an underclassman. There were a few tight ends working out that day, and there was an underclassman tight end there who has offers from like everybody, and Muse was far better, in my opinion. Now, I stopped myself when I was thinking that and said, okay, well, after I found out it was Muse, you go, okay, this is a guy who's been in college. So there is that benefit, but still, if the underclassman guy had committed, it'd be something everybody's all fired up about. But this is a guy that, I mean, he was, like Wes said, he was over 6'4", 240. He's a guy that could step in and play. The staff believes, you always got to get a guy on campus and let him go through everything, but they believe he's a starter caliber guy. And so if you land a guy that you think could start for you and improve your team, that's normally a move you make, whether it's a high school guy, junior college guy, transferred, no matter what school. LSU had an offer out. NC State had an offer out. I guess if he had transferred from LSU to South Carolina, that would be more of a validation. I don't know. But, look, again, we talked about it with O-line, with like the 2- and 3-star thing. If you stocked your roster with only William and Mary transfers, probably not good. But there's a place, there are D2 guys in the NFL, there's D2 guys on rosters across college football, guys that, were walk-ons at programs who were really good. So if you add guys like that who are good football players, no matter the background, to a team, and you have good pieces around them, it's something that can work. And so I thought it made a lot of sense. I mean, Wes laid out sort of the tight end situation. Beyond those upperclassmen, there's just not a lot of proven guys right now. And so you get a guy who can help you on special teams and at tight end and do some different things for you. It makes a lot of sense.
Well, I think, too, Chris, the fact they didn't have to take this guy. From a numbers standpoint, it's not like you were taking a guy just to come be a warm body. We were told by someone, we being South Carolina, we get better with this pickup. Like, we're a better team with Nick Muse on the team than without him. I think it was a situation where they felt like, hey, this guy makes us better. He wants to come. Let's do it. And I think, personally, depending on when he's eligible, this guy's going to be a starter at some point in his career. Like, this guy will start, probably a special teams guy as well. The tight ends tend to get involved in some of the kickoff and kick coverage teams too. And then, they had talked about 2 tight ends in this class regardless. So basically you're talking about bringing in one guy that's a little bit older, more of a veteran presence, and then bringing in a true freshman as well. Jaheim Bell is somebody they like a lot that's committed to Florida, but very, very high on South Carolina. I think you'd say they may have a better chance than Florida does to end up with him. So, it makes more sense, I think, once you get down into the details on why they have this thought process at that position.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to disparage him, the transfer, like anything like that, because as we've talked about a lot today especially, and then just in general over the course of doing this podcast, recruiting is an imperfect art, and it absolutely makes sense that guys are going to fall through the crack. I'm more fascinated about how the coaching staff even saw or heard about this guy if he's at William and Mary. Do y'all have any insight? Like, did some random William and Mary fan just email Will Muschamp and be like, hey, you got to check out our tight end, he's pretty filthy? Or how does that part of it work?
Well, I think it's just with the transfer portal, I imagine coaches are probably constantly looking at that thing and just saying, who's out there?
But there are hundreds of names in the portal.
Yeah, but if you're paid millions of dollars, somebody's...
I guess you're just watching films on hundreds of guys all the time.
You have a support staff in
true.
place that I'd imagine there's a transfer portal monitor within the staff. We need to check on that. There's got to be somebody whose job is just to check the portal probably every day, right?
Definitely. I would say so. I don't know specific to South Carolina. I remember Bruce Feldman wrote a story about the portal recently and on The Athletic. And he sort of laid out, he talked to some people about the portal within college football programs, and a lot of it was about how things are just out of control. Like, there's names of guys that are, just obscure names, like guy in there wasn't even on a team or whatever, just crazy stuff.
I can put my name in the transfer portal?
Go for it. But guys, programs definitely have guys that check it. And in most cases, you got to think about these recruiting departments. They have guys that watch a lot of bad film, like on every high school in your recruiting area, which certainly South Point out of Belmont, North Carolina, is going to be one that you have some familiarity with. I can guarantee you, if somebody saw Nick Muse's name come up in the transfer portal at South Carolina in their recruiting department, they're familiar with that name for sure.
Interesting. All right, guys, we're recording this on a Wednesday morning. It's officially the dead period, as I mentioned early on in the podcast. But this past weekend was the final bit of action that we'll have for about a month. It was camp. There were a bunch of people in town, and you guys were there for all of it because y'all worked tirelessly, and we very much appreciate that. What are some of y'all's takeaways from this final weekend of camp? Who'd you see? Who'd you like? What was interesting? Any interesting conversations you had with coaches or players?
Well, I think a guy on Saturday that really caught my attention and I think is worth keeping an eye on for 2021. I know sometimes it's hard to just sort of wrap your mind around 2021 before we're even done with 2020, but quarterback recruiting is a little bit different. It's a little bit earlier. People tend to like to hear about quarterback recruiting a little bit more as well. It tends to move the needle a bit. So Colton Gauthier is a kid out of Georgia. Had a great visit to South Carolina about a month ago and then was back Saturday, threw for Dan Warner, got just extensive one-on-one instruction for him in the morning, then threw with the rest of the campers in the afternoon. And I think it's kind of a situation where you look at some recruitments and it just sort of makes sense. Both sides have a ton of mutual interest in the other. And so this is sort of a little bit of info, a little bit of gut feel, a little bit of just reading the tea leaves. But I think South Carolina has put themselves in really good shape with Colton. He's a 6'3" kid. Probably he's listed, I think, 185, 190. Maybe he's up to 200 pounds or so now. But threw the ball very, very well. His stock has started to go up. His name has gotten a little bit more traction lately. He's a high 3-star on Rivals, number 2 quarterback in Georgia for that class. Has a chance to move up a bit, but I thought, and he it's fresh on my mind too. But I thought Colton just threw the ball very, very well, and South Carolina seems to be very, very interested in what he has to offer for that class.
All right, well, let me ask you this before we get to Chris's thoughts from camp. Just since we're talking about Colton, Will Muschamp is known as an excellent recruiter, excellent developer, especially of defensive players. If there's been one knock on Will Muschamp through the entirety of his career, it's his ability to construct top-tier offenses. And yet, here's South Carolina having signed DeCarrion Joyner, Ryan Helinski, Luke Doty, and now being, I don't want to say an early favorite, but at least it seems like reasonably in the mix for a guy that's going to be another top quarterback prospect in the country. Where is this coming from?
I think a lot of it has been, recently has been Dan Warner. And, I think you even look, you look before, fans obviously, won't have a lot of positive things to say about Kurt Roper on game day play calling, but I thought Kurt Roper did a good job of getting in on quarterbacks early, evaluating quarterbacks. A bunch of guys he offered early ended up getting a bunch of offers later on. So they were able to move in quick. I think some of it may just be on sort of correcting issues in the past. Obviously, I think if Muschamp had a quarterback who was good at Florida earlier, because Will Grier redshirted his final year there. If he had gotten longer at Florida, or if they had played Grier, or if Grier was in a class ahead or something, he may still be at Florida, competing for the East. Because I think if you combine the defenses he had there with a solid quarterback, it's probably a completely different scenario. So I think they've done well. Some of it's, I won't say luck, but some of it's about, what guys are in your territory, what guys are out. Luke Doty's an in-state kid. But the other side of that is they went across the entire country and got Ryan Helinski, which is pretty much unprecedented for South Carolina. Not even just Muschamp, but for South Carolina itself to go over there, get a national quarterback from California. I think Muschamp has put a lot of personal energy and effort into recruiting that position as well. And I think kids sort of gravitate to Dan Warner. He's a different presence. Obviously, he's not the young, exciting, cool guy like T-Rob or Brian McClendon is for a DB or a receiver. But I think the quarterback position maybe lends itself to, this is a guy that's coached a number of top guys, a number of top offenses, has a very just calm, laid-back demeanor, is a teacher of the position. I think that appeals to a lot of quarterbacks.
All right, Chris, your turn.
Talking about camp?
Yeah, just what
out
got your
things
eye.
that stood out from the last day maybe. I mean, C.J. Stokes was one. Kid out of Hammond from the 2022 class, running back. The first time I saw CJ was in February. Sat down at Hammond and talked to a few guys, Alex Huntley and Saul Diaz and CJ Stokes, and learned a little bit about CJ. And you could tell he was going to be a guy who was going to end up getting offers because he's got speed. He's a track guy. You could tell he could continue getting bigger with his frame, and he was a really driven kid. He takes football and his development very seriously, and so he's really been working hard. He looks a good bit bigger even since February to me, just seeing him in South Carolina. So the staff saw him in 7-on-7 when Hammond had a good showing at 7-on-7 earlier in June, and then he came back for the last camp day. He ran a 4.41 in the 40, and then he did really well in 1-on-1, so they pulled him out after that and gave him his first offer. So that was a big one. And with him being an in-state guy, I thought that was a pretty significant development. Another thing that stood out, Wes and I talk about this a lot. There's so many guys that roll through camp. I think Muschamp said on Twitter the other day they had 4,000 guys come through camp between 7-on-7 and the lineman camp and the individual camps. And so
I wish y'all could see the face that Pearson's making right now.
Yeah, 4,000 guys. Now, not all of those are prospects, obviously, but they always
the vast majority
are not. Vast majority are not. But it gives you. I mean, we saw a lot of guys, who are really good players and are either committed to play somewhere or are going to be Power 5 guys or have South Carolina offers, and they always sneak in some, not on purpose, but some get past us because we're trying to see so many different things. We know some guys that are going to be there, so we watch. We're looking for others, trying to figure out who they are. And so the last day of camp, South Carolina had Jaquez Robinson in camp. He's a guy out of Jacksonville Trinity Christian who's committed to Alabama. Had no idea he was going to be there, even that he was, and found out later. And that's an interesting one. It's heating up a little bit. He got an offer from South Carolina, family ties in Sumter, and Florida's been in the mix as well. South Carolina's now heavily in the mix, so he's certainly one to watch. South Carolina's defensive backboard's still somewhat fluid. They got some targets out there, but with them looking at taking a couple more, he's certainly one to watch now. So that was an interesting development, I thought.
And neither of you are going to mention the single most interesting thing that happened over there at the practice facility this weekend.
What was that?
Y'all both participated in it. You gave me the Hammond kids 40 time. You didn't mention your own 40 time.
Yep,
we ran the 40. Do y'all want to tell the
story? It was not so good. We need to work on our starts, I think.
Okay, so yeah. I was impressed, first of all, seeing the video. But before we get into the specifics and break this down like we do any other recruiting visit, because you guys were doing your combine stuff out there. You are in the indoor facility, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the origin of this? Is this just something that media do, that recruiting guys do, or did you two just decide
we
you
might
do
full
this?
Combine next year, but that will be very bad.
I don't know.
Did y'all do this last year?
Pretty. We've talked about doing. I think we talked about doing a 40 last year, and we just never. Like a lot of things, we talk about doing them, and then we never do them.
It's been a discussion for a while.
It's been in the works.
Just sort of like which one of us is faster has been like a discussion.
So this was a discussion between the two of you. This wasn't, you guys were standing there recording people's 40 times, and Will Muschamp came up to you, and he's like, I'd like to see what you guys run, because he likes to make fun of the media
happen.
in a good-natured way.
No, it's just been like a who's faster.
Was this in the middle of camp, like guys are throwing around you and doing O-line drills, and y'all are like,
no, we waited till after
everybody was
okay, so everybody left.
Everybody was gone.
There. Who was timing?
Well, so Colin Taylor was there.
Okay,
obviously,
good. He's impartial.
Yeah,
and a numbers guy. I trust him.
So what we did was I did a 40 by myself with him timing, him being Chris, and Colin, just to get two numbers. And then Chris did a 40 with me timing and Colin timing.
Okay.
And then we did our actual race, which was videoed by Colin.
Who won? I mean, I watched it, but
yeah, Chris hawked me down and got me.
Whew.
It was close.
It was very close.
It was close. Yeah,
I had him, and then he turned on the boosters.
You gotta finish the race, Wes. It's only 40 meters. How do you run out of gas?
It's 40 yards.
40 yards. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I watched too much soccer.
Jesus, man, that's bad.
You measured in kilometers. How many kilometers we ran during the day?
Oh, don't even get me started on the metric system, which we should all be using.
But dude, all right. So we asked people to. By the way, we got to give away that free time. We never even followed through with that.
We definitely need to follow through with that.
Yeah, the closest guesses or the closest guess, we're giving away a free month to. But everybody's
what were your times?
Everybody's like 5'5", 6'5".
Yeah,
5'9",
sundial,
sundial, calendar.
Tomorrow,
like,
end of time.
Come on, I mean, give us a little bit of credit. I know. I mean, I'm
and more
33.
people pick West too.
Oh yeah, see, the real problem.
Yeah,
I could see Chris over there stewing that so many people picked against him, so his adrenaline got going. Like, I was like, this is not good. We got an underdog story here.
Man.
Everybody was picking me. I was like, I don't need everybody picking me. You know, you don't want to be that much of a favorite.
Target on your back.
Yeah, exactly. But Chris got sub 5 on Colin's watch.
Yeah.
So,
did you get sub 5?
No, I got 5'2".
5'2", and you were 4'9"?
I had Chris at 5.
Like the highest, 4.99, I think.
And I had Chris at 5'17", which they said I had a slow
fudge.
And
I had a slow hand. Colin had a fast hand.
How ready for this were y'all? I mean, were
not
y'all
ready
wearing
at all.
tennis shoes or cleats? Were y'all wearing what you're wearing? Were you wearing like a collared shirt, or were you like?
I was wearing a collared shirt. Yeah,
wow.
Tennis shoes. I did put on some athletic shorts to change, but I had a collared shirt, tennis shoes. We did not receive any training. Like, we didn't get down in a sprinter's stance.
Oh, y'all were just standing,
like,
and then
we sort of leaned over.
And was like, oh, we gotta go.
I was like 3/4 of the way standing up. Wes leaned down a little bit more. But I mean, if we get some timing or some training, and then if we get people who can actually like are trained at timing, I'd be curious what we ran.
Get USC's official timekeepers. I mean, I think y'all are there while they're there.
I think next year
we're gonna set this thing up.
We can do it again and
can
do
I
a
do it
little
with
bit
y'all?
better.
Yeah.
I
really
what
run.
do you think you could do?
I mean, I
had no idea what to
I would
expect.
definitely be sub 5.
You would definitely.
Well, I mean, so I'm a good bit younger than y'all, so I have more recently probably had a time timed. I think the last time I had a 40 time was my junior year of high school, and I ran a 4.6.
Yeah, you'd probably beat us then.
So yeah, I would probably, but it's also been a while since I've done that. But I love that y'all do that, and we got to get like broad jump and stuff like that too.
You saw the video, so just eye test. You feel like you could beat that on the?
Yeah, although I was impressed. Y'all both moved pretty well. Not that, because I mean, I was talking about you going to the gym earlier, and I know you play soccer. I know y'all are both athletic. I think for people that just listen to this and have never met us or never seen us, they probably just assume that since we talk about sports, we're like fat and just eat Cheetos and like sit in the basement and just like bang on our computer all day.
Yeah,
I do like nachos.
I mean, nachos are dang.
I mean, I was happy with our times, like, to be, because I didn't know what to expect, and people, dude, like an actual 4 or 5 that these kids are putting down.
Yeah.
That's hauling.
It's absolutely motoring.
Like, that is hauling. So I think people forget how quick. I mean, you got linemen running 4.9. I mean, the athleticism of a true high-level SEC football player is insane. I don't even know if you get that watching it on TV or even in the stadium, how big and fast these dudes are. So I didn't know what to expect. I was pretty happy with it. I mean, the other thing is I've got a terrible ankle, and Chris, you've had surgery within the last year, so you throw in those two things. Like, I'm pretty dang happy to be 33, and he's almost 33, and put those down compared to what our expectations were from our loyal fan base on Gamecock Central.
Yeah, people were just picking on you.
Tough crowd.
No,
but wait, do y'all know who got the closest?
No, I got to go back and do that.
Look,
okay, all right. So next week we'll do another
reveal.
Well, this is kind of a dead period podcast because we're in the dead period, but we had stuff to talk about. We'll do another dead period podcast where we talk about absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and
we'll reveal.
There'll still be
winner.
some commitments along the way.
Yeah,
I mean, even though it's dead period, it's never really a dead period, is it? But
we'll have some other fun, like alternative kind of stuff for y'all for the summer. So
we'll do a Q&A for the next one too. I'll post it on the board.
Yeah.
By the way, we got to mention quick shout out to Bill Anderson, who is we told him we'd try to fit him into the podcast. He's a member of our site, and his kid Logan was at camp. Was that Friday or Saturday? I don't know. His kid camped. He's a young O-line / D-line from the upstate, and we said they actually are avid listeners of the podcast. So we said
thanks for listening, y'all.
We would shout them out if we could.
Wait, are they from Anderson?
No, I don't believe so.
Okay, because you said the upstate.
Woodruff, I believe, is what it is, right?
Okay, all right.
Because we were talking about their running back there. So, and Coach Bradley Adams at Woodruff.
Cool. Bill and Logan?
Yeah.
What up,
Shout
y'all?
out.
How's it going? All right, so before we wrap up today, I was going to say the 40 stuff for the end, but then you mentioned the 4-4-1, and that made me think about it. But we do have one more actual football thing to talk about real quick. There were 2 official visitors on campus this past weekend.
Juwan McDougal, receiver out of Deerfield Beach, Florida, and then Joey Hunter, who's a defensive back out of Georgia. Those both went well. I mean, it looked like McDougal was going to make an August decision, but he's pushing that back a little bit, and he's going to go take some other officials, probably Maryland, Oregon, Purdue, Ohio State. But still a target of interest there for South Carolina. Maybe one more receiver in this class, so he's certainly a guy to watch. And then Joey Hunter, final official visit of the process. He got offered by South Carolina this summer in camp. He went to camp at Texas A&M, got offered by those guys after that, and then took an official to South Carolina. So officially down to 7 schools, but really it's South Carolina, Texas A&M. And there's been some buzz about both, going in. He's supposed to decide on July 2nd. We have an update on him on GamecockCentral.com with sort of the latest, yesterday's insider report. But yeah, he's certainly a guy to watch going forward as well.
So his decision, we got 2 upcoming decisions. His July 2nd, and then Miles Murphy July 8th, which will be either South Carolina or North Carolina there, I think, is strongest.
Alabama's been in the mix, too.
Alabama's been in the mix, too.
But South Carolina, North Carolina? Those are the kinds of marginal head-to-heads that you have to win, I think.
Yeah. North Carolina needs to win it, too.
Yeah.
And Alabama wants him.
Gosh.
The kid's a player, man.
He's a good player.
We spent some time on our local show yesterday ranking the importance of each of Carolina's games this year, and a bunch of people were like, App State, Charleston Southern, like, you got to win those. And then a buddy of mine sent me a projection of every team's final ranking on Carolina's schedule, and App State was projected to finish ranked ahead of, obviously, Charleston Southern, but also North Carolina, Kentucky, and I think Vanderbilt.
Really?
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, North Carolina's probably going to be I know Mac Brown's back, but what's he working with? I think it's going to be another disastrous year for North Carolina, if I had to guess. So Carolina's got to win the head-to-head. Go ahead and get Miles Murphy. Add insult to injury after they beat North Carolina by, 35.
Goodness. Well,
that'll do it for this week's episode of Another Carolina Podcast as I lose my voice. I guess that's why it's time to go.
Good timing.
We'll be back next week with the winner of the Guess Wes and Chris's 40-time contest. We need to catch your name for that. And in the meantime, we'll have some fun stuff for you. Be on the lookout for a thread. We're going to do a little Q&A, a little mailbag, just to have some fun here during the dead period of the summer. Also want to remind you to rate, review, subscribe, share with your friends. It's the best way to support the podcast if you like what we do and want to hear a whole lot more of it. And if you're curious and you're not a subscriber and you want to know what it's all about to be able to get all of that insider access, use the exclusive podcast code GCPOD. That's GCPOD. That'll give you a month of Gamecock Central subscriber access for free. We'll be back next week.